agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney and defender of freedom, Jay Carson.
Hey, good morning, Mike.
Hey, Jay, how are you doing today?
Well, hang on. There's. I think Merrick Garland's at the door. I get it. No, I'm sorry. It's not him. All things considered, yes, pretty good.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear it. And before we get going today, before I forget, actually, I just want to give folks a quick programming note, I guess you'd call it. In the past, we've been putting out our supporter exclusive midweek episodes on Wednesdays, which is the day that we also typically run interviews, which are available to everyone, really. But to spread things out a little more evenly going forward, we're going to be posting the midweek episodes on Tuesdays and interviews on Thursdays when we have interviews to post. And we've really been doing a lot more interviews. And so you should be expecting a lot more of those in the future. Just wanted to let people kind of know what's going on with that. But speaking of what's going on, we do have a whole bunch of stuff going on that we want to get into. We actually have some updates from the last time, Jay, you and I were on. And, of course, the FBI Trump search, more on inflation, honoring our PACT Act, primary stuff, a whole bunch of things. And we're going to just jump right into it in just 1 second. All right, Jay, as I said, last time there were two stories that we talked about, and we said, we're not sure about this. And as opposed to so many pundits who just sort of...
And it wasn't entirely our fault.
No.
Because this was something where the Congress came up with a deal that was last minute, and it was sort of on a Friday afternoon. And,
yeah. And we didn't want to just opine without checking, and so we sort of reserved judgment until we could actually check. And one of these things that we wanted to check on was whether...
Now you have judgment.
Yes, now we have judgment, or at least, semi-judgment. One of the things we wanted to check on is whether or not ARPA money could be used for monkeypox. And Jay, I know you suggested, you said, in Cleveland, it seems like they're using it for pretty much whatever the hell they want.
We're using it for dog parks.
And there's actually some scandals about that, I know, in Cleveland. But anyway, so... we agreed we would check. And so according to the final rule issued by the Treasury Department on the use of ARPA money, ARPA funds must fit into one of four categories, and that's responding to public health and negative economic impacts of the pandemic, premium pay to essential workers, government services to the extent of revenue loss due to the pandemic, and making necessary investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So now, the way I read that, Jay, is technically and according to clearly the intent here, no, our ARPA money can no more be used for monkeypox than it could for, I don't know, a dog park, right? But I could see how someone might be able to sort of twist that in a way.
Doesn't that cover healthcare? I mean, what was the first category you read, though?
No. Negative economic impacts of the pandemic, not any pandemic, but
not
the
any.
Pandemic.
All right.
So
the pandemic.
So this is why I said, before we started recording, I said to Jay, well, I feel like you're kind of right, but not entirely right, or somewhat wrong on this. And that I think if you're following the clear legislative intent here, that no, ARPA money can't be used for monkeypox or dog parks or what have you, but whether or not it would be and anyone would challenge that, that's a different story. So I'm going to give you kind of a halfway maybe on that one, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the second thing we were talking about was Medicare drug negotiation, which of course is part of the Inflation Reduction Act that was signed into law this week by President Biden. And you were wondering, well, is it real negotiation like traditional negotiation? And the answer to that actually is really complicated because the process, as I dug into it and read the legislation, wow. But no, it is not. You're right in the sense that it is not negotiation in the sense where one party can walk away. So, but it's not exactly a take it or leave it. because there are a bunch of conditions attached to what exactly the government is able to do. So they can't just say, well, you're going to give everyone this drug for $1, and that's just, because we say so. But you're right in the sense that it actually is not a traditional sort of both parties are sort of free to walk away negotiation. So on that, I would say, yes, you're mostly right on that one. So there you
All
go.
right.
All
so
right.
yes, so I'm the fact checker, the politics guy fact checker indicates I am. And my bigger point with the Medicare spending was that the legislation gives the government a power to impose a significant excise tax on people who don't go along with it.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a big hammer that people don't have in any other negotiation where you're dealing with someone and they say, well, we don't like this deal, and then you say, well, okay, I'm going to tax you.
Right. And you're absolutely right on that. And sort of to balance that out on the other end, there are safeguards built into the legislation saying that, for instance, that the government cannot require companies to sell drugs below cost, or it's things like that.
Right.
So but anyway, I would say that in the end, yes, you are substantially right on that one.
2 for 2.
I'll call it
one and a half for
yeah,
two,
whatever. There you go. But anyway, so with that kind of out of the way, obviously the big story we wanted to really open with this week was the FBI's execution of a search warrant at former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago home on Monday. And as we know now, Attorney General Merrick Garland personally approved the search after the failure of, in his words, less intrusive means of retrieving classified documents that Trump may have illegally taken when he left the White House. And now, of course, in terms of the response, well, Republicans freaked out. The FBI is the Stasi, defund the FBI, according to Marjorie Taylor Greene, and this is a banana republic sort of tactic, all that sort of thing. And now we have reports that the magistrate judge who approved the search warrant is now apparently under protection or in hiding or something like that because of multiple threats on his life and doxing of the FBI agents who conducted the search and so forth. But initially, Jay, the FBI, and I would argue rightfully so, was silent about the details because that's what you do with investigations, is you don't just basically kind of put them out there in the public, right? That's standard operating procedure.
Correct, and that is the standard procedure, and that is, I think, in their manual, so to speak, right? Of this is how you handle things. That you do not comment on an ongoing investigation.
Yeah, but later on,
there are exceptions.
Yeah.
To that,
and this week, when the government actually requested that warrant be unsealed, they cited the public's clear and powerful interest in understanding what occurred under these circumstances, and so that in fact was a compelling argument. At least it was to the federal magistrate judge who approved that request. And once I think we saw, at least we have more of a sense now of the materials that were taken, right? We know that there were, I think, 11 sets of documents, around 20 boxes, including, various classified, top secret, sensitive, compartmentalized information, and just 2 things with, miscellaneous top secret documents, just some things kind of kicking around there, that sort of thing. But one thing, Jay, that wasn't released,
and also a binder of photos, and
all kinds of stuff,
pictures, and stuff that is plainly not classified or top secret.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, according to former President Trump, none of it was classified.
Yeah,
because.
Declassified.
Unbeknownst to us, presidents apparently have the magical power of waving their hands and saying, I hereby decree all of this declassified, and whatever it is that I took, and it's now declassified, because that's how government works in some people's minds. But clearly that's not actually how the declassification process works. Now, I was going to say one thing that we don't know, and we probably will never see, is the affidavit that the government submitted to the magistrate judge for their probable cause, issuing that warrant. That's probably something we won't be seeing, although it seems like a number of people on the right are saying that, no, we actually need to see that. In fact, we need every single detail of the case against the former president, and that's the only way we'll be satisfied, which of course is kind of on the face of it. I think even you would agree, right? Sort of ridiculous, the idea that if the government has, a case against somebody, that they will release all of their information to the public. That's I think sort of ridiculous, right?
Well, yes and no.
Yes and no. Okay.
Look,
I really want to hear the no. I really want to hear the why you think that if someone is, I guess what I'm struggling with here is if somebody may have committed a crime and the government's investigating it, that they should release everything before they're done with their investigation. I mean, that just seems to fly directly.
That's where I would say no.
Okay.
They shouldn't release it before their investigation. But I will say, obviously, if there is going to be any kind of charges brought or prosecution brought, they're going to be required to release it. That's part of the criminal discovery process, is that the government has to hand over, here's all the stuff we've got on you.
Yeah.
Both good and bad. So that's why I say yes and no. I think you can make the argument that it's ridiculous to demand this right now, or that the government ought to hand over everything right now.
Okay. Yeah.
That said, it's not ridiculous to say this is information that, one, the defendant needs to have, and two, certainly the public needs to have. Now, the other thing I'd say on that is, in this sort of a situation, I think, regardless of whether it's legally required, I think it makes a whole lot of sense for the government to reassure the public that this is not a witch hunt, that this is not the actions of Banana Republic, and the fact that if the government says no, we won't release anything, the more silent the government is on this, the more that feeds into conspiracy theories.
Let me stop you there, because I don't understand your argument here, and I want to make sure I do, because it seems to me that no one in the Justice Department has said we will never release this information if we indict former President Trump. There's no one has said that, and so I guess I'm also confused as to how you would say the government should go about reassuring people that this isn't some witch. I mean, what are they supposed to? This is not a witch hunt. We are not a banana. There's really nothing, it seems to me, that the Justice Department can do that it hasn't done to this point to reassure people. And so I guess I
sure it can. So my sense would be, listen, if you are going to execute a search warrant on the residence of a former president and essentially a current presidential candidate, someone you would even describe, let's put it this way, if this was happened in another country, we would say, there was a government raid and search upon the, opposition leader's home, right? For good or ill, that is sort of a term that could fit Donald Trump. I think it's incumbent to say why this significant step needed to be taken, rather than, from what we've learned, and no one's disputed this.
But they have. But they have.
Oh,
Attorney General Garland made it clear that there were
you don't even know what I'm going to say yet.
But you said they should make it clear why they did this, and I said they have, to the extent that they could, because Attorney General Garland on multiple occasions now has said that we have requested this information. It's been part of a months-long sort of back and forth, and this information has not been willingly given to us, and so I guess. So go ahead and explain to me exactly what you think, the ways in which, I guess you would say, if you were Merrick Garland, what would you do that he hasn't done, or what would you not do that he has done, or something like that? Because I just don't see it. But convince me. I'm open to being convinced.
Right. I would say, listen, everyone, what I was going to say that everyone has agreed on is that there had been negotiation, there had been boxes turned over earlier on. The Trump team has maintained, now this could be correct or incorrect, that it was certainly willing to talk, and that it hadn't had any communications with the government since the request that we need you to put a new lock on this. So I would like to hear why all of a sudden? Why now? Right? If this, again, President Trump left office, year and a half ago. If this problem has been going on for some time, we know at least they've been negotiating this issue on these documents for a couple months. And again, it sounds as if those negotiations were amicable. At what point did they become so inamicable that the Attorney General decided they needed to resort to the much larger and I'll even say it, unprecedented step of seeking a warrant? Now, again, this is a search warrant for stuff that they essentially already knew is there of his home, without sort of intermediates. There are a whole lot of things you can do before you get to a whole lot of armed federal agents showing up.
But Jay, like you said, it was 18 months. I mean, it seems to me that former President Trump has been treated with kid gloves. I mean, that
it hasn't been but the last, we only know what's being reported, was the last discussions were in June, and the government had looked at stuff. Trump's attorney said they were cooperating. The government had asked that a new lock be installed on the room where this material was being held, and that was done. What happened between then and now?
And that would
raise this
right.
to a search warrant kind of thing.
And that would presumably be part of that affidavit that was presented
right.
to the magistrate judge. And that's unlikely to be something, at least that's my sense, that's unlikely to be something that is going to be unsealed. That would be, I think, sure. fairly unprecedented. But you know more about that.
But I think whether or not, well, I don't really, because that's not what
You're not
I
a criminal guy,
do,
yeah.
Right? Sure. And unsealing warrants. But one thing I do know, Mike, is that here in America, no, I think the issue that strikes me is, regardless of whether it can be unsealed legally, that's a different issue, right? The government still can say, listen, we took this extraordinary step because this was an extraordinary circumstance. And that extraordinary circumstance was X, right? We had been negotiating with the former president for this long, and we reached an impasse, or we received some sort of information that, one, this material would be destroyed. Two, under the Espionage Act, he's going to hand it over to a foreign government. There is some other reason that this had to be taken immediately. And I think that's what people are scratching their heads over. Is why now? Why all of a sudden? Why this drastic of a step? Why not a subpoena?
I seem to recall that actually was actually what had actually been part of the process, and part of the argument was over whether or not the Trump folks were actually complying. And so,
right. and you know what you do when someone doesn't comply with a subpoena is you go to court and you have a hearing. You don't show up with the feds and start seizing documents
unless you think that there's good reason to believe that those documents will be lost or destroyed or something else.
Exactly. And that's the information that I think the public needs to know, is we had to take this extraordinary step because of X, because Trump was going to destroy them or hand them over to someone else, or there was some imminent threat, if you will, that had changed what the status quo had been. If this is just a routine discovery dispute over, I get to keep this and no, I don't, and is it classified or is it not classified? Again, you've got, if the documents are secured, you can handle that in a court proceeding, where the lawyers show up and they argue about, well, he says he declassified them and no, he didn't, and you can argue about that process. But I think it does violence to this to our sort of our republic when you take this step and you don't give the public that's something to realize. Oh, this is why this is happening,
Well,
and it feeds the conspiracy theories that the let's put it this way. This is would you do this with an FBI that has in the past, well, not admittedly, but it got caught falsifying warrants to federal judges, to wiretap people involved in this campaign, to an FBI that tried to sneakily, the way they approached the whole Michael Flynn situation, right? Reaching out, say, well, he's not going to expect that this is really an interview and all that sort of thing. And a government that admittedly did not turn over exculpatory information in the Michael Flynn case. I think the idea that we can just automatically say, oh, I'm sure Merrick Garland must have had a good reason, that might have flown. And quite honestly, I would have probably accepted that. I'm a law and order kind of guy. If this had been a couple years ago.
But let me just be clear that Merrick Garland could not, on his own initiative, just do that. That judge needed to actually approve that. So it's not just like the lawless FBI just can kind of run in and just conduct raids without a warrant. And so that warrant had to be granted by a judge.
I know. But what I'm saying is Merrick Garland can certainly say, listen, American public. This is the reason we sought that warrant. It's because X, Y, and Z. There's nothing that prohibits him from saying that. Now he may say, "Well, I'm going to, you're going to give away some sort of confidential information or tip off somebody by doing that." That would be an argument in some cases.
I think I see what you're saying, and actually,
it's the documents, right?
I would say that you haven't entirely convinced me, but I think you have an important point there, and I think that it's possible that Garland, who I think from the get-go has been somebody who's been very cognizant of the charges of politicization of the Department of Justice, and has been very, very reluctant to comment on investigations because I think he saw that as being a big problem in past administrations. And I would agree with him that maybe he has erred too far in that other direction. And so, in your kind of walking through this, I think you're right, actually. I think there's probably some sort of a middle ground where Garland could be able to say something, if not, even if not to the general public, certainly to the House and Senate Intelligence Committees in some sort of a briefing. So I think
we have evidence that raised significant concerns that these documents were going to be lost, destroyed, transferred, something like that. And that's why we needed to take this immediate step to preserve this evidence.
Now, of course, I think what would happen here, I'm agreeing that maybe makes sense in really thinking about it from your point of view. But of course, given looking at it maybe from how potentially Garland and Justice were seeing it, is that, well, we could say that, but no one's going to believe that unless we provide. Plenty of people will just refuse to believe that unless we provide the actual evidence, which would be essentially showing our hand in an ongoing criminal inquiry, and we're not going to do that. So therefore, it's better to just not say anything. So I mean, it's kind of a no-win situation.
I guess my question is though, but the nature of the criminal inquiry is also something that's perplexing, right? The unsealed warrant seems to indicate Espionage Act, which can mean a lot of things, right?
Yeah, and obstruction.
Yeah, and obstruction. So I'm not sure what exactly the crime is. If the crime is just possessing documents, over which there is a dispute over whether they're classified or not.
Which it's not, pretty clearly, given the.
But do we know that?
Yeah, we know that because of in the information that was unsealed, they have the sections of U.S. code that were cited as the related to the search warrant. So yeah, we know it's Title 18, Section 793, 2071, and 1519. So yeah, we do know that.
Right, but that goes to possessing top secret information when you're not allowed to.
It also goes to Espionage Act, and it also goes to obstruction. And neither of those two things have necessarily any connection to whether or not those documents have been magically orally declassified by the president. In which case,
well, of course it does. Because
no, they don't.
Declassified,
no, they don't. No, you're
wrong.
wrong. You're wrong about that. I mean, I know you're wrong about that, and I'll say that. Absolutely, because just because something is classified or unclassified doesn't mean that it is being held with the attempt to obstruct an investigation. Doesn't matter what kind of document it is. If you are
all right, no, but setting aside the obstruction, because you can't bootstrap your way into a search warrant just through obstruction.
Okay, the Espionage Act. Let me say
you have evidence. We'd like to see it.
The espionage.
Well, that's obstruction.
Well, the Espionage Act, there are plenty of instances in which Congress has designated certain documents as being, whether or not the president declassifies them or not, as being sensitive and so forth, and defense information. And so it doesn't matter what the president does. And also, I should point out that there is absolutely no evidence that President Trump, in fact, President Trump has, I believe, himself said that, well, I orally declassified that. And that is not how one declassifies documents. And so this idea, I think, that the president, that, like I said, Donald Trump just said, I hereby decree that all these things I took are now declassified. I think that is ludicrous on its face.
Right. I get it. I would tend to agree to some extent. I think, but my point is, so ergo, we have to show up tomorrow with guns ready to go.
I don't think it was guns ready to go situation, Jay. So let's not. Let's not.
All right.
Let's not get into this. The FBI's the Stasi kind of thing. Okay.
Well,
agents showed up and they conducted a search. No one would. I mean, people were not there. There were not guns ablazing and all that sort of thing. So let's not add fuel to this fire that we don't need to.
All right, but they were there uninvited.
Well, sure, that is the whole point of a warrant,
right?
Obviously, sure, absolutely.
The federal government showed up uninvited.
Yes,
in the early morning
with a warrant.
And it was, again, and that's significant in that it's not we'd like to come in and talk. It's we are coming in and searching your home.
Yeah, well, that's what a warrant is.
Here we are. We're coming in and searching your home.
I understand what a warrant is.
But that. I think people.
I think we're talking past each other, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I think you made a reasonable case that it would be good to have more information as to why now. So, but I think if this is about Espionage Act, regardless, I still don't understand what the need for the warrant was when this is an issue. That if, as you point out, it's not things that were classified, declassified, and again, that's something that you can sort out in court. The important thing is why did this have to happen now, and why could it have not have been done through a other process, saying, listen, we hereby demand through subpoena or otherwise that you give us these, hand over these documents. Or you go to court with a declaratory judgment suit and say, listen, these are not your property; they're classified. You have to give them over, unless there's some actual evidence that it's going to be destroyed or misused,
That's where I have a big problem.
Well, let me stop you there because
you match that with the FBI's history.
It sounds to me, but it's not just the FBI, Jay. So it seems to me that you're basically kind of getting into deep state territory here, starting from a presumption that this federal magistrate judge is corrupt or incompetent or some combination thereof.
No, I didn't presume.
Well, then, wait a second. Let me finish here, because you're saying, well, what was the reason? And it sure sounds to me from what you're saying and the way in which you're saying is that you're starting from a presumption that this is illegitimate. And what I'm saying is that we have a process. And you are saying that this process, it sounds to me like you're saying that this process of going to a judge and getting authorization for a warrant, that if the general public is not also given this information, that therefore we should assume as a starting position that this warrant was illegitimate. And that to me is just like a shocking, you want to talk about Banana Republic, that to me is Banana Republic. And I'm really kind of stunned that you would start from that presupposition, being a law and order guy.
Supposition that any unreasonable search of a person's
well,
home or property.
Yeah, there's the presupposition right there. You're calling it an unreasonable search.
Let me calm down. My goodness.
Well, you called it an unreasonable search. I mean, that's your words, not mine.
I didn't call it an unreasonable search.
Yes, you did. I can even rewind the tape for 10 seconds.
We start with the presumption. Let me finish. We start with the presumption that any unreasonable search is invalid, is unconstitutional.
Sure.
That's the base point of the Fourth Amendment.
Okay.
In order to get over that presumption, which again, this is why you need to let me finish, what you do is you go to court and you obtain a warrant. The presumption in that court that you start out with is that you don't get a warrant. Right. The burden of proof is on the government to show that there is probable cause that a crime has been committed, there's evidence of a crime being committed that needs to be secured. So that's when I say the presumption is that the search is invalid to begin with. That's the way America works. There's not a presumption that the government can just show up at your house. They have to go through these steps. Okay, so let's go through the steps.
Before we go through the steps, so I just want to correct, or I just want to kind of a point. I think where we kind of started getting past each other is, so it's really the presumption isn't that the search is invalid, and so it's maybe a language thing that I was keying on.
Correct. Yes.
The presumption is that the government should not be allowed to search an individual,
right.
or so. Okay, that
right.
I get what you're saying. Yes, I agree entirely. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, so the government goes to court and says, "Hi, Judge, we've got evidence that a crime has likely been committed, and that their evidence of that crime is at this place, in these specific, it's this specific type of evidence in these specific type of places, and we'd like to search those specific type of places." That evidence is typically an affidavit from someone who's an investigating officer, or something like that. At which point this is of course an ex parte process, meaning it's only the prosecution's there, and it's a low hurdle to get over. And the judge looks at that and says, "Well, okay, if you've got an agent swearing that this evidence is there, I'm going to grant the warrant." That's typically the way these things go. The reason I'm a little troubled, of course, is there's a history between the Trump and the Justice Department on these kind of very issues. And you've had issues where the government literally lied to obtain a warrant. So that to me is concerning. And the fact that, listen, we would never have known that the government lied to obtain that warrant, but for a sort of deep investigation. Given that public distrust of the government, I think would be incumbent on the Attorney General, when he's seeking another warrant to search a former president's house, to come forward with more information that you might, if you're just trying to, prosecute a drug dealer. Because this is something of significant public interest. When you've had a president who's really his entire persona, his entire platform is essentially The government's out to get me. The deep state is out to get me, unjustifiably so. That this is all a big conspiracy, that the election's fixed, that all of this. It just makes sense if you are the attorney general and this is happening, that you get that information out there, or you take whatever other intermediate steps you need to before you get to that point, to say, when the time comes, look, we tried everything. We tried asking nicely. We called his lawyers. Here's the emails to his lawyers requesting the documents. Here's the emails to his lawyers requesting a meeting to talk about this. Here's where we went to the judge and we filed a suit saying he's holding these documents that belong to the people of the United States and need to be returned to the archives, or it's classified or otherwise sensitive material that he's not allowed to have. There was just so many steps in there that you could have done, and you look at this also in the lens of the New York Times.
Well, hold on a second. You've gone on for a while here. Let me kind of interject just for a minute, because I think we need to make a distinction, or at least kind of break things down into there is the issue on which I think we are more or less in agreement, and that issue is that the Attorney General probably should have done more to manage how this would look, certainly, or the information that the public was getting, or at least members of Congress, right? Okay, so that's something. Now, you and I might disagree in terms of what that might have actually looked like, what that could have involved, but that's, I think, a point on which there's not a ton of distance between us. Now, it seems to me there's a kind of a separate but related issue, and that is whether or not actually everything was done that could have been done prior to taking this certainly unprecedented step. And we don't know that entirely. Right. It seems like I am more inclined to basically take the Attorney General on his word that these things were done. But as you point out, the Trump camp is saying that, no, these things weren't done. And, Donald Trump has said, if they just asked for this stuff, we would have given it to them, that sort of thing. And that's maybe an extreme position. But
it would be, because this is the game you play in litigation. And is that, what you do is the one side says, they never asked for that. And then you go to the judge and says, no, judge, here's the email or the discovery request where we asked for exactly that. And that's my point, is if Merrick Garland had that, he'd be waving it around.
We don't know that. I think that's an assumption.
Backwards on this.
That's an assumption that I understand why you are making that assumption. You make a case for that, why that's not an unreasonable conclusion to draw. But I think one can also take the exact same facts that are available to us and draw the conclusion that Merrick Garland is just a very circumspect, low publicity sort of guy, has gone into there, and so he errs on the side of not opening up ongoing investigations, and so there isn't necessarily any sort of I don't want to say deep state conspiracy, because I know you don't believe that, but or at least I don't think you believe that. But what I'm saying is that if
this is an ongoing investigation of a former president and current presidential candidate, that makes it different.
Yeah, well, it absolutely does, and I think there's reason to look at the evidence and think that actually the Justice Department and the FBI were very much aware of this and treated Donald Trump very differently than they would have treated you or me if we had, God help us, sensitive, nuclear information, that sort of thing. So, I wanted to move on to sort of the politics of this. We've kind of gotten into this a little bit and the reaction and so forth. But before we do that, let's just take a really quick break and we'll come back and kind of get into the political aspects of this. Okay, so like I was saying, I wanted to get into political aspects of this, but before we do, Jay, it occurred to me that the first part of this conversation we have is kind of like a microcosm in many ways of our sort of friendship over this last few decades. Is that at least once we kind of shifted sides, or I shifted sides, is that I am convinced that you are just flat out wrong about something, and so I emote quite a lot, and you sort of try to calm me down a little bit. And then oftentimes what typically happens is that I'm able to sort of see things a little more your way, even though I still am fairly convinced that you are wrong. So I think that's kind of
All right.
the extent to which, but actually, like I said, I think there was really more agreement between us on this than maybe I initially might have thought. And I think part of it also is, and this gets into the politics, is, seeing how so many people have reacted to this before, have drawn conclusions. And I think maybe this gets into why I was reacting to what you were saying, because I've seen how so many people on the right seem to have just immediately jumped to the conclusion, whether it was honestly done or whether it's through some sort of, kind of political calculation, that the FBI are a bunch of jackbooted thugs and no better than the Stasi and that sort of thing. I mean, there were some of the quotes and things, or where Fox News, jokingly puts the judges, the magistrate judges' face, photoshops it on Jeffrey Epstein and to play into this pedophile sort of thing. And I think you would agree that it is just tragic that.
No, I mean, I would say that all that I think is entirely inappropriate.
Yeah. I mean, and doxing the FBI agents who are just, and so that kind of thing just makes me sick. And I think because I've just been really immersed in that over the last couple of days, that maybe my initial reaction to some of the stuff I was a little more maybe hair triggered than I would have been otherwise. But I figure you were very much against that, certainly.
No, I'm absolutely against that, but that, again, it's such a weird world where these lines sort of blur. Where you, I'm against unwarranted or I mean, the idea that searching the former president's house would not be a major political firestorm, right? And that Merrick Garland or the Justice Department sort of didn't see this coming. That's what speaks to me of the sort of the political malpractice and makes it look all the world like there's a bigger problem going on, right? It like saying, if we execute a warrant on Trump's house, all hell's going to break loose. Of course, we really ought to make sure everyone understands we've got a really good reason for doing what we're doing. Before we do it. The last thing that I was about to say before we took the break, and this is the other piece that I think is concerning. The New York Times, the failing New York Times, reports that Biden has privately said that he thinks Trump should be prosecuted. Now that's over the Capitol riot. But still, when you've got a situation where, again, the paper of record is saying that the sitting president is saying the former president should be prosecuted. And, not long after that, you have a search warrant executed upon his home with little explanation. I mean, wouldn't you agree that anyone looking at this, if we were looking at this in a foreign country,
no, I think that's unfair. I think I see what you're saying, but I think it's unfair. It'd be one thing if, I don't know, Biden were at a rally and he were encouraging people with cries of lock him up, lock him up. Not that anyone would ever do that, but this is some anonymous. Wait, let me finish. Let me finish. Yeah. This is some anonymous source being quoted in the Times saying that the president has privately suggested this. That's very different. So no, I mean, certainly.
No, I agree.
But yes, I agree that any sitting president who would encourage the Justice Department, who would publicly encourage the Justice Department to prosecute or to investigate his opponent, that is a huge problem. That is definitely a banana republic-ish sort of thing, right? I think the White House claims that they were unaware of this FBI raid, and they heard about it not exactly when we did, but and I hope that's the case.
I mean, do you believe that?
I hope it's the case.
I don't.
I hope it's the case. And I think, we should all hope it's the case. We have no reason to know whether or not that's true or not. And I think it speaks a lot to the dysfunction and cynicism and lack of trust in government that we hear something like that and so many people just assume, well, of course, that can't be true because Biden is just the corrupt deep state operative who's trying to destroy Donald Trump.
No, I would say it can't be true because one of the biggest sins, the worst things you can do in politics is to sandbag somebody, especially one of your own, someone in your own party. And by that, I mean, put them in a situation where things are developing and they don't know what's going on. They don't know what's coming. That's just what my experience tells me, that you don't, if you're a cabinet level official, you don't do this sort of thing and not let the president know that you're doing it.
I hear what you're saying.
To me, that's shocking. And if I'm the president, if I'm Joe Biden, and my attorney general says, "Oh yeah, I just think of it this way. Let's go back and let's say you're."
I agree. Let me just say I agree with you on this. So you don't need to make this case for me because I agree. But I will also point out that it's while sandbagging your boss is always a bad thing to do, there are cases in which your boss will come to you and say, "Listen, I don't want to know what's going on here. I understand you need to do your thing, and I need what I was going to use the term plausible deniability, but actual deniability." And there are certain instances in which, especially, and this is one of my hobby horses from way back, that I think that the idea that the Justice Department is so connected to the
you want an independent justice department.
Yeah, yes. but and so I think in these instances, this presents a special case in which I do not find it difficult for at least a president, an honorable president or a semi-honorable president, to say to the attorney general, "Listen, there needs to be a wall here between us on this, because if there's even the thought, even a suggestion that you mentioned this to me beforehand, that really does politicize the Justice Department." And that's. But I understand why people would say that, and I think again.
But I guess my question is, then why hasn't Biden said that?
Well, I mean, Biden did say that the spokesperson for the White House did say that they knew nothing about this raid, and they have said repeatedly in multiple forums that they are not directing the FBI, the Department of Justice, on this. And so, I mean, it has been said. It's not believed, but it has been said.
No, what I'm saying is, if I were the Biden administration, if this were the case, one, because regardless of it makes the president look bad, the sense that he doesn't know what's going on, right?
Well, he can't win then, right? I mean, he can't. So it's
no, you can win. No, you can win. Here's how you do it. You say, "Listen, I've been briefed by the attorney general on a significant criminal case. It's sensitive politically. I have instructed the attorney general to proceed as he sees fit, because I am not going to be directing these types of charges. But I firmly believe that no one is above the law, and I firmly trust my attorney general to act in the best interest of the American people in prosecuting what he sees to be potential crimes." And you say, "Listen, I was aware that there's this investigation ongoing. I am removing myself personally from the investigation, and I'm leaving it to the hands of the law enforcement professionals to take care of."
I think the administration
has
has said,
handle it, as opposed to be like, "We didn't know that," because to me, the "we didn't know that" is just beyond belief.
Well, I think that's an awful fine distinction you're making, and it seems like to certain people that might make a difference. But I think that the political calculation here is that the more we say about this, the more it looks like we're trying to cover or prevaricate or something like that. And so I get what you're saying, but I just disagree with kind of the optics of it and the political sense of it. But I do see what you're saying. I just don't think that makes sense politically. But anyway,
okay, let me just do the quick hypothetical.
Sure.
Back in the Trump administration, Bill Barr executes a search warrant on the place in Chappaqua. Trump says, "First time hearing of it." Would you believe that?
based on Donald Trump's past, it would be difficult for me to believe because he seems to me to be the most thoroughly corrupt president of my lifetime and perhaps in history. So no. I mean, because whenever someone makes a statement, of course, you have to consider who it is that is making the statement.
Sure.
And I know of no one in public life in the United States who I can think of, at least at a high level, who is more, seems to me, thoroughly corrupt and contemptuous of rule of law than Donald Trump.
Yeah, I get it. But I guess we can concede that Trump is horrible,
Okay.
without also seeing the point that, again, to me, this is just not the way presidential administrations or any organization works.
Yeah.
Where an attorney general makes what may be the most, again, as we keep saying, unprecedented, right? It's a really, really, really big deal.
It is.
And you don't mention it to your boss. Again, this is and setting aside the Justice Department piece of it.
Right.
This is something that's going to rile political passions in a country that is already pretty well riled. And again, just as a heads up, say, hey, boss, I think you ought to know we're going to do this. Now, again, that's another option that Biden had. He could say, or that Garland had, depending on how this played out. Biden could have issued a statement saying, yes, the attorney general came to me and said that he believed there was sufficient evidence to support this warrant. I said I would not intervene. Again, that's the thing that shows.
Yeah,
okay,
I understand what you're saying, and you've made that point a number of times, and I guess I'll just give my rejoinder that I've given the same number of times, is that I don't think that would work the way you would think it would work, is all. And I get what you're saying. Okay. I understand your argument, but I think that the reaction would not be what you think it would be. And I think that's what I certainly think that the Biden administration and the Justice Department, Merrick Garland, considered exactly what you're saying, but they did not, in my judgment, rightly, did not believe it would play out the way you think it would play out. And they felt that actually the more they said about it, the worse it would actually be. And I think that that's actually the correct political calculation. It was a no-win situation. And so, but I understand what you're saying. I just don't think it would play out that way. So, but you mentioned the inflamed passions and all that. Something that occurred to me, and this is probably, we sometimes talk about Trump and three-dimensional chess and all that sort of things, right? But it's possible, I guess, that this is a great way for Donald Trump to sort of trap, if you will, to the FBI, right? In the sense of saying that, well, let's not give up everything and let's force them to take action. And then that's just going to really strengthen the whole deep state thing. It'd be a great way for me to kick off my, re-election campaign and that sort of thing. And so, I mean, I guess it's hard for me to believe that, but there's part of me that wonders, well, Trump is a pretty crafty guy, right? And this plays so well into the whole deep state sort of narrative that animates a lot of folks on Trump's base. I mean, there was that guy, right, in my town here, Cincinnati, who was killed by authorities. I
was worried about. I heard someone on the attacked the FBI and on the run. I was going to check in on you. But.
I mean, big poster on Truth Social, and apparently enraged about the raid on Trump's place, and went to the FBI field office in Cincinnati with an AR-15, and looking to wreak vengeance. I mean, and that's some awful stuff, certainly. And I know,
and you and I would agree that that's something that, look, that's not entirely unanticipated.
No, and that's why you got to wonder and you got to hope, certainly, if I'll say this, if there isn't something that the Justice Department felt was there that was just incredibly important, nuclear stuff, whatever, I don't know, then even though I agree, nobody is or should be above the law. Certainly, of course, we all, well, maybe Donald Trump doesn't, but most of us agree that, right? But I think also you need to say, well, wait a second, what will this do to the country? And sometimes you give people a pass who don't really deserve a pass because the implications of acting would be so incredibly destructive. And
Yeah.
and so I don't know that calculation. We can't know that calculation because we don't have the information. I just certainly hope that, and I think Merrick Garland is a smart and politically astute guy, which is why I'm inclined to believe that there was something really big that the FBI had a good reason to believe was there, or else they wouldn't have done in the first place. Now, if that doesn't come up, then I think that suggests, if nothing else, that there was an enormously dangerous political miscalculation that was made.
Yeah, I'm sort of thinking more to the latter.
Yeah, well,
and if you're thinking if Trump is being crafty, right? Is this his plan to?
Yeah, I mean, my thinking, right, exactly. My thinking is that Trump says to someone in his orbit,
make myself the victim, and that puts me there out.
And not only that, but basically kind of entice the FBI, say, go to someone in my orbit and say, listen, I think he's got some nuclear stuff here, kind of on the down low. And then the FBI jumps in and there's absolutely nothing there except for some top secret stuff that may or may not have been declassified, but nothing that's like a smoking gun kind of, thing. And so all of a sudden, then that just is a huge win for Trump. And that's, maybe that's, again, ascribing more craftiness to Donald Trump than one should. But I don't know. He clearly is an intelligent and very smart guy in that kind of way. So maybe that isn't crazy, but that feels a little too kind of multi-step conspiracy theory thing, sure. And I shy away from that stuff just as a matter of
the other if you're looking at the other way though, what Democrats want most going into the midterms and going into the 2024 presidential election is to keep Donald Trump front and center.
Sure. Yeah.
And this would also serve that goal, because what we've spent the entire show talking about a president who's been out of office for a year and a half. Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean,
yeah.
And I think there are those on the right who can make that same sort of craftiness argument about the timing of this. And that's where those concerns. And I'm saying you don't have to be a believer in the deep state or anything like that to say that.
Sure.
That's the way politics works. So.
Oh yeah, and that gets to the question of exactly how politicized and partisan is law enforcement, right? And that's a fair question to ask, certainly. And so, I'm of two minds of at least some of the Republican reaction. Kevin McCarthy, right, said that. Made that, I don't know, a tweet or something to Garland, preserve your documents and clear your calendar, and then somebody, Jim Banks, who's a Republican Study Committee chair, said, Jim Jordan led Judiciary Committees in January, can't come soon enough. And, I'm of two minds. My first initial reaction is like, oh my God. But my second reaction, well, wait a second, of course I want transparency in federal law enforcement because these folks have enormous power. I think I am rightfully skeptical of the fairness and impartiality of, Jim Jordan in leading those investigations. But sure. That doesn't mean that I don't think, certainly the FBI and the Justice Department shouldn't be above the law either. And I think that's important to keep in mind.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you feel that way.
Nobody should be above the law. Anyway,
right.
So, as you point out, we have spent almost an hour talking about. So I want to talk about at least something else and some at least potentially good news, semi-good news. I don't know. I wanted to get your take on it, on the inflation front.
87,000 more IRS investigators?
No. Well, maybe that's a story for another time. But on Wednesday, August 10th, which is, by the way, my birthday, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released the CPI report for July. And, inflation still unquestionably high, 8.5%. That's actually a decrease from June's 9.1%, as well as May's 8.6%. And as you would expect, The biggest decreases were in energy, with gasoline falling 7.7%, fuel oil down 11%. And this is in the context, of course, of a very strong job market. The July job growth was way more than the forecast, the consensus forecast, in fact, about more than double. Unemployment is at 3.5%, the lowest it's been in half a century. Wage growth, it's not meeting inflation, but it's very strong, and wages tend to be stickier than prices. And so a couple of things occurred to me. Number one, to ask you, Jay, is how I'm sure you see this as good news, but I'm wondering, you're probably a little less optimistic about it than I am, but I wanted to get your kind of just reaction to this, at least guardedly good economic news.
Yeah, no, I would say it's good news that it looks like the pace of inflation, at least in certainly the energy sector, is slowing. The bad news is when well, again, and President Biden made sort of silly statements that inflation is zero. When you look at other sectors, that's not necessarily the case.
Overall
it's
inflation,
just adjusting energy down, and balances out. So overall. So it's good news that gas prices are coming down. It's bad news that we're continuing to spend more money. And look, this is, as I predicted, the inflation will come down, but it's going to take a while. And if we're still at year over year inflation of 6-7%, at the end of this year, that's still not helpful, not healthy, and not something that people will be happy with.
And I think even optimistic analysts think that by the end of the year, we're still probably going to be in 4 or 5% territory. And that's if a lot of stuff, breaks right. And of course, we still don't know, there could be virus, pandemic upsurges, and, with Russia and so forth, because the food issue, that's one of the biggest increases, 1.1% or something like that. So yeah, I thought we kind of agree that while this is good news and we want to see inflation trending down, this isn't some kind of we're out of the woods thing. I mean, I know there are some folks on the right who are saying, what if we don't have inflation as an issue to work with in the midterms? And I think that's I don't think that's really going to be an issue.
You will.
Yeah. But of course, it's obviously better politically for Republicans if inflation is getting worse as opposed to getting better.
Well, and again, when you say getting better, to some extent, look, a lot of times, when we talk about no more inflation, that doesn't mean prices are going down. It just means they're not going up as fast as they were before. So, that's in a particularly volatile sector like the energy market. You can see that, right? And gas prices fluctuate from day to day and month to month and all that. It's going to be less so when you go to the grocery store. And you say, well, look, a thing of chicken thighs still costs almost twice as what it did last year. So, I think that's still going to be with people, and they're not going to see prices back to the way they were, and which is economic actually a good thing, right? You don't want deflation,
right?
Inflation's bad, deflation is worse.
And I would think we both agree that this is not the sort of thing that should cause the Fed to kind of tap the brakes on the planned interest rate hikes.
No, and to the extent any of this happens, right, it's sort of anticipating that's already baked into the equation, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I'd say sort of like good news, but no one should kind of, be jumping up and down at this point. So, but, there is one other thing that I wanted to talk about, really. It'll make us go long, but this is something kind of a personal connection. And that's some legislation that I do think is very definitely good news, and that's the PACT Act, which President Biden signed into law this week. It expands VA health benefits to service members who were exposed to these toxic burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. Because in many instances, the health conditions that come from these things can take, many years to manifest. And prior to this, how the system works is that the service member or former service member had to make a case for that connection, and where there wasn't a presumptive sort of connection there if they wanted to get VA benefits care for various conditions. And what this did, among other things, is to list a whole bunch of conditions as presumptively connected, which is not to say that they are, but just to say that veterans can get medical care from the VA based on these conditions if they met the service requirements, being in certain areas over certain times, that kind of thing. And it's, it's not cheap. It's expected to cost around $280 billion over the next decade, but there was really widespread support for it. The Senate approved it 86-11, and the House, well, there was less bipartisan support in the House, 256 to 174. And I wanted to get your take on this, Jay, before I kind of talked about sort of my reaction to it.
I think overall that's good. I mean, as I understand, the wrangling was over costs, and there had been an amendment which was later pulled regarding sort of accounting methodology that would have applied to other government agencies, and that was sort of the issue.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly why yet so many people voting against it in the House, other than just the cost issue.
I can actually answer that.
And maybe just the I don't want to be seen voting with Nancy Pelosi. But
yeah, there's part of that, certainly. There are some folks who would just never vote for anything. Like Thomas Massey, I think, just votes no on everything as a matter of course. But there are folks like that. But a big part of it actually has to do with some kind of arcane stuff that a lot of Republicans in the House said, we're for this, but what we don't like is that it actually makes a portion of this funding mandatory, meaning that it's automatically put in place every year, continued unless Congress votes against it, as opposed to making it all discretionary spending, which means it needs to be reapproved with every budget. And oftentimes, Congress is reluctant to make spending mandatory because they like the idea of being able to say, hey, look, I voted for this wonderful thing, right? That kind of thing. And so I can see where a lot of members of Congress would like to kind of keep on their record saying that we kept on voting. I voted for this 38 times, that kind of thing. But of course, the reason for keeping certain spending mandatory, and it's not really mandatory in the sense that you can't change
any Congress can overrule any other prior Congress.
It just means that there's less of a chance that it's going to get taken out, and kind of can provide for a little more stability there. And so, I mean, to me, this is the kind of thing, spending for veterans who've been affected by toxic burn pits. It's the sort of thing that would be really hard for a lot of folks to vote against in any case. And so I don't know that the mandatory discretionary thing is that big of a deal, actually. But, to me, I would say it's personal interest because, I served in the Gulf War, of course, and under this legislation now, if I developed any number of cancers or long respiratory conditions, I could go to the VA and get, and not have to go through a lot of legal wrangling or administrative wrangling to get care. But, also, I mean, I remember those burn pits, and it was that you have bulldozers come in and dig these huge pits. Well, really, and the stuff we would throw in them was just, it was just like furniture, plastics, just really anything. Hey, you got some stuff, throw it in the pit, because who doesn't love a fire, right? And then we would just throw all this stuff in there, and then we'd come in and just douse it with just gallons and gallons of diesel fuel and light it up. And it was something to see, and it was also something to smell. So this is something, when I heard this, like, well, wow, I definitely was exposed to toxic burn pits more than a few times. At the time, of course, when you're, some kid, you're like, yeah, I could throw a chair into the fire. That's really cool when you're 20-something years old, that kind of thing. But yeah, so I think this is definitely a good thing, and $280 billion over a decade, given the sort of exposure for a lot of veterans, including myself, I'm very happy this passed, and I think it's very much a good thing. And it seems like you pretty much agree on that. All right. Well, we have run a little bit long, but before we go, I just want to mention to folks that you really should, if you haven't already, add When Do People Decide to your podcast lineup. It has now become a part of my routine, and really every episode I listen to, I come away learning something new, feeling that it was time well spent. There's just one, speaking of personal connections, episode that really resonated for me. This battle between anti and pro LGBTQ camps in Cincinnati, where I live. And so that was a really fascinating episode. And, Jenna, she just does a great job. And all these episodes, even if you don't live in Cincinnati, which, most people don't, it's a great story. And the whole series is just great. And of course, you can find When Do People Decide? Well, wherever you get the Politics Guys. So there you go. All right. Well, before we go, also, I want to thank one of our newest supporters. That's Burgundy. Thank you so much for becoming a supporter. We really do appreciate it. And if you're not already a supporter, we hope you will consider becoming one, because without supporters, we couldn't keep the podcast going. And when you are a supporter, you get all kinds of good stuff like ad-free versions of this show. You get the special supporters midweek show. Like this week, Jay and I are going to be talking about human nature and democracy. Trey and Ken talked about that in their show, the human nature thing. I had all kinds of problems with some of the stuff they were saying, so I'm looking forward to kind of teeing
I busted out my old copy of Rousseau here just last night, Mike.
There you
That's
go.
what I'm reading on a Friday night.
Rousseau did come up. So we're going to talk about that and some other stuff. It's a lot of fun, and supporters get that. So, and as always, if you are not a supporter and you would like to, but money's a little tight, that's not a problem. Just send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will make sure that you get all of the shows that we put out there. I am happy to do it. And whether you're a supporter or not, it really does help if you can help us to get the word out by rating the show, reviewing it on whatever podcast app you use, as well as sharing the show episodes on social media. That is a really big deal, and we hope you'll be willing to do that as well. And of course, if you ever want to get in touch with us, if you're a supporter, Discord channel is the best way, but there's also our Twitter, Facebook, that's always in the show notes, as well as mail@politicsguys.com. And finally, a special thanks, as always, to our executive producers. They are great: Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Andrea Masker, Daniel Toe, and Ryan Beasley. Jay and I will be back with a new show for you next week. We hope you'll join us.